Hi, this is Matt. Today I'm reviewing Silent Spring by Rachel Carson. Silent Spring is one of the most influential environmental books ever written. And I guess when I first picked it up and started reading it, I was sort of expecting something quite poetic almost and philosophical, but it actually turned out to be quite different. And to really understand the impact of the book, you need to understand something about the historical context it was written in. So, Silent Spring was published in 1954, and around this time there were a variety of synthetic chemical pesticides which were in widespread use, particularly in the States, which is where the book was set. And what Silent Spring mostly is just a huge compilation of evidence detailing the true extent of the unintended harm that these pesticides were in fact causing to human beings and to nature. And Silent Spring sort of came at this moment in history when concern was growing around these pesticides, and what it did was really catalyze this environmental movement, which led to some really significant changes, including the banning of certain pesticides and the creation of the United States Environmental Protection Agency. So, as I mentioned, a lot of the book is comprised of this compilation of evidence, so many case studies which detail the impact of these pesticides on people and on the natural environment. And I thought I'd talk through two examples that stuck in my mind particularly. So the first one relates to toxicity to humans. And in this case, there was a New Zealand man who was undergoing treatment for obesity. And it was noticed as he was undergoing treatment that he started to exhibit symptoms of poisoning. And when this was examined, it was found out that due to prior exposure, the pesticide dieldrin had accumulated in the fatty tissue of his body. And as he lost weight, the pesticide began to seep out into his bloodstream and poison him. This is an example of a property called bioaccumulation, whereby a toxic substance accumulates in the fatty tissue in the body. And I guess if you're curious to learn a bit more about the different pesticides in Silent Spring, it's really easy to jump on Wikipedia and search for DDT or dieldrin or chlordane or heptachlor or parathion, and you'll see that our current state of knowledge about these pesticides, it shows that a very clear link to things like cancer and damage to the immune system, damage to the neurological system, and just basically a litany of fairly horrifying effects. And the thing to keep in mind is that back in 1954, most of these pesticides were still considered to be relatively harmless. The second example I wanted to talk about relates to the effects of these pesticides on the natural environment. And it actually explains why the book is called Silent Spring. So in this example, there was a control program that was done in an attempt to control Dutch elm disease, which results from a type of beetle called the elm leaf beetle, which acts as a vector for this disease. Maybe it's a virus or something, I'm not sure. But anyway, DDT was sprayed on the leaves of elm trees. And what happened was that the DDT stuck to the leaves of the trees and killed some of the beetles. But months later, the leaves would fall to the ground and begin to decompose. And then worms would come along and consume the decaying leaf matter, but they would also ingest the DDT, which was still active, hadn't yet broken down. And then what followed on in the springtime was that robins and other birds would come along and eat the worms, and they would be poisoned and would either be rendered sterile and unable to reproduce, or they would die outright. And it was noticed in this community and in other communities where pesticide spraying was prevalent that the birds stopped singing in the springtime. And this is the reason why the book is called Silent Spring. This example leads into what I believe to be one of the most important things to be learned from Silent Spring, which is rooted in an understanding of the concept of an ecosystem. So every organism, including humans, is part of this interconnected, interdependent web of life. And a disruption in one part of the web of life can end up rippling through it and lead to consequences that can be difficult to predict. So you see with most of the pesticides described in Silent Spring, the intention of spraying was to target a specific pest organism, like a mosquito or a beetle or a fruit fly. But the ecological consequences were often far broader, and in cases led to the poisoning of wildlife and of livestock and of humans. I think humanity tends to have this kind of narrow perspective that our actions, so when we harvest from or degrade or destroy a particular part of the web of life, that it's an act that is done in isolation, but it's not. So whether we are eradicating insects or cutting down trees or perhaps burning coal to produce electricity, the effects of these actions at a scale that has been magnified by modern technology and by our exploding population and our perpetual need for growth can end up rippling through the web of life and having catastrophic consequences, such as the collapse of an ecosystem which ultimately we depend upon for our survival. Rachel Carson captured this with a simple and fairly blunt statement, saying that if humankind poisons nature, nature will in turn poison humankind. If you're the kind of person who isn't inclined towards cynicism, you might have a read of Silent Spring and expect that following from its publication, the industry would have responded promptly and attempted to address this problem of toxicity and the widespread damage that these pesticides were in fact causing. But this was absolutely not the case. So what happened was that members and representatives from the chemical manufacturing industry attempted to personally attack Carson and discredit her work. And they engaged in this campaign of misinformation to try to undermine the public understanding around the true harm that was being caused by these pesticides. If you think about it, there's a really strong parallel to the way that the tobacco industry responded to evidence surrounding the health risks of smoking, and also the way that the fossil fuel industry has responded to evidence around anthropogenic climate change. The common theme has been denial and these attempts to spread misinformation. And you might wonder why this is. The way I think about it is that fixing the problem requires that the sale of this very profitable product either ceases or is substantially restricted. And this represents a direct threat to the survival of the industry that is producing it. So there, in fact, exists this very strong incentive for the industry to act to undermine public understanding and political will for change. Fortunately, the truth did eventually come through, And due to its impact, Silent Spring is now considered to be a triumph of scientific writing, and one of the most influential environmental books ever written. By raising the alarm on the irresponsible use of these highly toxic pesticides, Silent Spring catalyzed an environmental movement which contributed to the creation of the United States Environmental Protection Agency and a ban across the United States on the agricultural use of DDT. Amongst other successes, this has been credited as a major factor in the return of the bald eagle, which was on the brink of local extinction in the United States. I do want to mention that the book does remain controversial today, and I think this is at least in part due to the backlash it created against DDT, which has been useful as a weapon in the fight against malaria, due to its ability to kill mosquitoes. It is worth mentioning, though, that Rachel Carson's stance was not that all pesticide use should be eliminated, and her work should not be taken as some kind of hysterical call for full-blown chemophobia. Instead, what she was calling for was the responsible and well-managed use of pesticides that was informed by a full understanding of their toxicity and potential harm to humans and the natural environment. Beyond the use of pesticides, Silent Spring has important lessons to teach us about how we can examine and tackle today's environmental problems. Although the book does offer a dire warning as to the destruction that we can and are causing to the natural world, I would say that understanding Rachel Carson's enduring legacy does give us reason to hope. It shows us that the efforts of one person can catalyze the change that we need to ensure our own well-being and the survival of the natural world on which we depend.